Hello, everyone, once again, and good day to you. My name's Jonathan Underwood. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I'm also committee chairman for Troop 1607 in Statesville, North Carolina. And this is Emergency Preparedness Merit Badge Part 2. Today, we will be going over requirements number 3 and number 4. So the requirements for this lesson, number 3, show how you could safely save a person from the following: touching a live household electric wire, a structure filled with carbon monoxide, clothes on fire, or drowning using non-swimming rescues, including accidents on ice. And requirement number 4 showed 3 ways of attracting and communicating with rescue planes or aircraft. So those are the requirements we'll be covering today. So let's get started. All right, rescuing someone who's touching a live household electrical wire, there's several things that you need to think about when you're planning your rescue in this situation. So we're going to discuss the following thinking points. Think about these whenever you're making your plan, and then write down your plan in your workbook and get together with your merit badge counselor to go over that plan. So the things to think about. Number 1, the human body is a great conductor of electricity. This is very true. The human body is well over 66% water. Water conducts electricity very well. Therefore, the human body is a good conductor of electricity, especially if the human body is grounded. If you have a metal zipper, metal buttons, metal belt buckle, and you have a high amount of electricity going through you, you could get very badly burned there. Electricity is what makes your heart beat. Getting shocked by a high amount of electricity could actually stop the heartbeat. So electricity can be a deadly thing. So if you're going to rescue somebody who is being electrocuted, you need to stop and think about the fact that if they're a great conductor of electricity, you're a human being as well, so that means you're going to be a great conductor of electricity. So you don't want to just run in there and grab somebody who's being electrocuted and try to pull them away. So that having been said, you need to think about where the electricity is coming from. If they're being shocked by an electric appliance that's plugged into an outlet, or they're working in the wall or working on an outlet and they're being electrified by a source of electricity that maybe has a breaker that would disconnect that electricity, can you run and hit that breaker real quick as a part of your response to this situation? Can you unplug the appliance that they're working on? Perhaps the plug at the wall is not the problem. There's something else that's causing that electrical problem. And if you can yank that plug out of the wall real quick, then you can solve a big part of the problem. If they're being electrocuted because they're standing in a puddle of water or laying in a puddle of water, and there's an electrical wire in that puddle of water and you're not sure where that wire is coming from or where the source of that wire is, then you've got to handle things a little bit differently. So one of the big things to consider is, where is the electricity coming from? What is the source? That leads into, what can you do to protect yourself in this situation? So if you're going to go in and you see someone being electrocuted in the home by a live household electric wire, and you're going to respond to that situation, number 1 thing you've got to do to protect yourself is use your brain in this situation. Think, you're a conductor of electricity, they're conducting electricity, so you don't want to run in there and grab them. Same time, you don't want to run in there with a metal pipe and try to push or pull or do anything else, because metal is a conductor of electricity. Or if they're standing in a puddle of water that's got electricity running through it and you're barefooted, you don't want to run in there and stand in that same puddle of water. So there's several things that you've got to think about to protect yourself in this situation. If you're going to try to push or pull or anything else, grab something that's made out of dry wood, because dry wood will not conduct electricity. There again, wet wood will. So just a lot to think about there. So think about those protections and how you would protect yourself. And then, how can you mitigate the effects of this situation? Are they burned? Do they, is their heart stopped at this point? Do you need to initiate CPR? Once they are away from the source of electricity and they're not being electrocuted anymore, there's probably going to be a secondary effect that needs to be addressed in order to mitigate the effects of the electrocution. So you need to think about those factors as well once you have initiated the original rescue. And all of that ties into the question of, how will you respond? So, are you going to call 911? Are you going to run to the breaker box and turn off a breaker? Are you going to figure out a way to get them away from the electricity? Maybe maybe you see the electrical wire, maybe it is a puddle of water, and there's some way that you can lift that wire up and away from the water to start with, and get that away from them. You can grab a yard rake, plastic head on the yard rake, wooden handle, real good for picking up a wire. Pick that wire up from a distance, get it away from them, and then get in there and continue with the rescue or the response and the recovery. So those are the thinking points. Just a few things to touch on with touching a live household electric wire. Use this as a basis. This is certainly not the complete answer, but use this as a basis for working through this rescue situation. So we're going to move right along now, and we're going to continue with a structure filled with carbon monoxide. So again, I'm just going to give you some thinking points, some things to think about as we look at this situation. So number one, what does carbon monoxide do to the human body? You need to know this up front. You need to understand how carbon monoxide reacts in the body, because that should really have an impact on your response. So what carbon monoxide does in the body, as you breathe carbon monoxide into your lungs, it replaces the oxygen, it attaches to your red blood cells, and it impairs the ability of the red blood cell to transport oxygen throughout your body. Now, through metabolism, your red blood cells are going to eventually shed that carbon monoxide. Your body's going to burn that off. But in the meantime, as long as there is a high amount of carbon monoxide being inhaled, the cells are going to use that and not the oxygen. They're going to attach to that, and they're not going to be able to get oxygen where it needs to go in the body, which is a really bad situation. So once again, we need to look at what is the source of the carbon monoxide. Is somebody closed up in a garage with a car that's running? Maybe they were doing some repairs on a car and they had it running in a garage. Not the smartest thing in the world, but it happens. And they're in there, and that builds up, and they've passed out and they can't get themselves out of the situation. A lot of homes have carbon monoxide detectors nowadays. If they have a gas stove, if they have a gas furnace, if they have a fireplace, a kerosene furnace, there are lots of different sources. Carbon monoxide is given off when fossil fuels burn. So there's lots of different sources for that. And, if you can find the source, and if you can extinguish that source, and then start, open the windows, open the doors, get a fan going, that'll also help alleviate the situation. So that's one thing you need to be aware of, is what is the source of the carbon monoxide? What can you do to protect yourself in this situation? So you see someone in the garage, they're working on a car, the car was running, they were closed up, the carbon monoxide built up, they passed out. Now you've got to go into a garage filled with carbon monoxide, and you've got to rescue this person, get them out of the carbon monoxide so that you can continue on with your response and your recovery. Well, the one big thing is you want to make sure that you're not breathing a lot of carbon monoxide in yourself. This is a situation where you definitely want to get the fire department on the way. You definitely want to get EMS rolling, because these people are going to need oxygen. They're going to need help beyond your capabilities. But there are certainly things that you can do in your response to protect yourself. This is where you want to open the doors, you want to open the windows, cut on a ceiling fan, cut on some kind of fan if it's nearby. Hold your breath while you get in there. Pull the person out if you can. Get them out into a situation where there's more air, clean air, more oxygen. Find out if they're breathing. If they're not breathing, then you need to do some mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to them. You need to do something to help them with that situation. But make sure you're protecting yourself while you go and get them. Otherwise, if you go into a situation where there's high levels of carbon monoxide and you're just breathing that carbon monoxide, you could end up a victim as well, and you certainly don't want to do that during your response. How can you mitigate the effects of this situation? The number one factor in this is you've got to get the person away from the source of the carbon monoxide. You've got to start getting that carbon monoxide dispersed and out into the atmosphere, not built up in the same place. You've got to stop the source of the carbon monoxide. But the sooner that person gets clean oxygen going into their lungs, the sooner that they're going to start recovering, and the less the carbon monoxide is going to have permanent effects on the body. So all that having been said, how will you respond? This is up to you to write out your response plan, talk about it with your merit badge counselor, but just keep in mind all the things that we talked about before. And finally, what does recovery look like in this situation? We said in the first lesson, or the first part of this, that recovery was returning to normal, regaining control. It's just making sure that a situation is being resolved. So, like I said, you want to have EMS rolling. You want to get this person some oxygen. EMS needs to put them on an oxygen mask. You need to get the CO2 buildup gone. Those are the things you need to do to get back to normal in this situation. So, again, that's a structure filled with carbon monoxide. Just a few things to think about as we move forward. Sit down, write out your plan, go over that with your merit badge counselor. Okay, clothes on fire. This is a simple one. I know they've probably already taught you in school. You've probably seen this before, especially if the fire departments ever came out and talked to your class or anything. Grab a blanket, yank the curtains down, grab a tarp, throw them down on the ground, smother the flames, stop, drop, and roll. That's what you do if clothes are on fire. So what is the immediate response in this situation? That's it right there. Stop, drop, and roll, smother the flames. But now you've got some other things you've got to think about. So what can you do to protect yourself in this situation? Well, for one thing, you don't want to be near the source of the flame because then your clothes could catch on fire, and you don't want that. So you want to get the person away from the source of the fire, get them down on the ground, get those flames out, and get that smothered. And then you can move on to the second part of your response, which is how can you mitigate the effects of this situation? You got to think back to your first aid merit badge, first aid training. You got to think about burns. Depending on how many layers of clothes they had on, depending on what was causing the fire, depending on what type of clothing they had on, they could have anywhere from 2nd to 3rd degree burns. If the clothes were burned completely through and you've got blistered skin that is exposed, you got to be very careful how you handle that. You don't want to be putting a lot of cold water on that. You don't want to put a bandage on that. You need to have 911 rolling. EMS, you need to have that response going so that they can come in there and they can handle the burn the correct way. If they've got a 1st degree, which is probably not likely, but if they have a 1st or 2nd degree burn, you can handle that a little differently based on what you learned in first aid merit badge. But either way, you want to make sure that they are getting the professional help that they need from paramedics, doctors, nurses, that type of thing. So what can you do to respond to and begin recovery in this situation? Once you've got the fire out on the person, you may have another fire that you need to deal with. You need to respond to that. You may have to respond to those simultaneously. You may need to let your 911 operator know, I have a person that's been on fire. I have a fire in the home. That way they can get EMS and the fire department rolling. If you can grab a fire extinguisher real quick and put out that fire, whatever it takes, you may have 2 different things that you need to start responding to and recovering. But the biggest thing is you have a human life involved. So you just want to make sure that you are using your first aid skills and the things you've learned to make sure that you're taking care of that person. So those are the thinking points for clothes on fire. Again, this is kind of a simple one on the surface, but there are things that you need to think about once you've got that fire out. How can you help move towards recovery for this person? Talking about drowning using non-swimming rescues, including accidents on ice. So some of the thinking points that you have to think about. Number 1, this situation has multiple parts that require a quick response in order to mitigate the severity of the situation and begin recovery. What I mean by multiple parts is you have a victim who is drowning. They need to be removed or rescued from that drowning situation. Once they're rescued from that drowning situation, you need to quickly figure out, is this person, are they breathing? Do they need CPR? Do they need mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? What can we do to help them get better? Again, you've got to get EMS on the way. You've got to get professional help for them. Another thing you need to think about with this situation, depending on where you're at, so you've rescued them from the water. You've got them to breathing again. They're awake now, but it's 30 degrees outside, and they're fully clothed in wet clothes now. So how can you mitigate the severity of that situation? Because now, they're at risk for frostbite. They're at risk for hypothermia. They're at risk for other situations now that we've got to address. So the first thing you need to think about is, how are you going to retrieve the drowning victim from the water? Remember, this is a non-swimming rescue. simple answers from your swimming stuff that you've learned in your rank requirements and swimming merit badge and life-saving merit badge. If you're doing a non-swimming rescue, you're on a dock, you're on a boat, you're on the bank of a shore, you can throw them a life-saving ring, you can throw them a rope, you can use a pole or a gaff to reach out and get them depending on how close they are to shore. If they're on the ice, one of the big things you got to think about is how thin is that ice? Is it safe to go out on the ice? And if you do decide to go out on the ice, you need to lay down on that ice and try to spread your weight out as much as possible. And one of the things you can do, depending on how many people you have for an ice rescue, is you can actually make a chain of people that are laid out across the ice where they're holding each other's hands. You want to have a good grip on the hand that way, or hand to leg, or what have you. And one person is reaching for the victim in the water. So those are some of the ways that you can do a non-swimming rescue. What response could be warranted once the victim is out of the water? Like I said, this is a drowning. They are probably going to have water in their lungs. If they're not breathing, you've got to try to clear their lungs, and then you've got to try to get them breathing. Once again, think about your swimming, your life-saving, your CPR and first aid. You've got to try to get the water out of those lungs, get them up on their side. That way, if they vomit, they're vomiting out, not back, they're not going to re-aspirate that vomit, but they can get that out of their mouth. And then, once they're breathing, once the immediate danger is over, you got to think about what secondary factors may exist. Check for other injuries, because you never know what could have happened. They could have fallen into the water from somewhere else. They could have hit their head on the bottom, on a rock or a tree or something. You never know what factors may exist. So check for head injury, check for lacerations, check for broken bones. If it's cold, like I said, think about hypothermia, think about frostbite. Get the clothes off. Try to get them some dry clothes, dry blanket. Again, we're scouts. Be prepared. So if you're away from home on a cold day and this happens, hopefully you've got some supplies with you. How can you protect yourself in this situation? You want to make sure that you don't become a drowning victim as well. If you're using the gaff or a pole or something like that, you want to make sure that you're stable enough. Use a wide stance, get low. Make sure they're not going to pull you into the water. If you're on ice, like I said, be mindful of how thick the ice is. Distribute your weight. You need to make sure that you're pulling the victim out and not being pulled in. Those type of things. How can you mitigate the effects of this situation? Again, we've covered that a lot with, what are the secondary factors and how do you respond to that once you have the person out of the water? And how will you begin recovery for the victim? That's going to look different in a lot of different situations. Obviously, you got the CPR and clearing the lungs and everything, but think about just some things that you're going to do to get that victim back to normal. What can you do to help get that situation started before, say, EMS arrives or that you get them to professional help? So those are some thinking points for drownings using non-swimming rescues, including accidents on ice. So that's the end of number 3. Number 4, moving right along to number 4. Requirement number 4 is show 3 ways of attracting and communicating with rescue planes or aircraft. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on this because I do want you to think about this. I want you to be prepared for this. So, I've got a picture here, a little cartoon picture I made of an island with SOS on the beach. Yeah, that actually works. People use that. No, a commercial airliner is not going to see that, but a rescue plane that's searching for you should be low enough that they see SOS on the beach if it's big enough. But there are certainly ways that you can communicate with rescue planes and aircraft. I know that's covered in your emergency preparedness book. It's covered in other places. Do a Google search. Put that information down into your workbook. Get together with your merit badge counselor on that and cover that with them. So thank you very much for your time. This has been Emergency Preparedness Requirements 3 and 4. Good luck on your merit badge and have fun scouting. Y'all have a good day.